Good afternoon, everybody who is here on the East Coast, and good morning to those of you across the country who are joining us as part of the 1,300 people who have registered for this conference that the United States Department of the Navy, SAPRO, is putting on with the State University of New York Center for Advanced Research in Reducing the Impact of Violence in Education. The Don SAPRO team and the SUNY team have been working very, very hard to put on a great conference, and we are excited for the main conference to start tomorrow. But just as importantly, in putting this together and talking to our Navy colleagues, we said, you know, there are a lot of folks in higher education, there are a lot of folks in the armed services who have to become preventionists overnight. They didn't start as preventionists. They didn't start as folks working on prevention. They started doing something else. And then as part of other duties as assigned or as part of their main role, this comes on. And we said, wouldn't it be great if we had some of the nation's leading professionals and scholars and researchers and trainers do just a no shame in listening in introductory course and get folks up to speed, whether they are somebody who's been doing this for a while and wants to learn more and dive deeper, or somebody who woke up a few days ago and found this as part of their role in our continuing work to try to raise the bar across the armed services and higher education. My name is Joseph Storch. I use he and him. I serve as an associate counsel at the State University of New York, and I am deeply proud to open this pre-conference session. You will hear later from our good friend Sharon Potter, but first we are so excited to welcome Jennifer Grove to the stage, as it were, to the digital stage. A couple of things as we are getting started. There is a chat, so please use that to share where you're from or your insights or your feedback. If you have any technical issues, please email arrive@suny.edu. And we can address any technical issues there. We have closed captioning available. And that is available in the CC at the bottom of your screen. And with those sort of do's and don'ts out of the way, we are so excited to welcome the Prevention Director for the National Sexual Violence Resource Center, Jennifer Grove. Jennifer has significant experience in prevention and also in translating some of the very complicated concepts into plain language that's accessible. Her full bio is on the website. And so without any further ado, please welcome Jennifer. Jennifer, please unmute. And as Jennifer unmutes, we would welcome you to turn your cameras on for those who are able to do so, so we can try to have as much of a conversation as we can in this distanced environment. Jennifer, thank you so much. The floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Joseph. Wow, you've really set the bar high here. I'm going to try to, can everyone see my screen? Like the slides? Okay, fantastic. I am so excited to be here today. Can you see the actual slide, not my presentation?
We're seeing it in back of the house mode.
Okay, all right, 1 second. I knew this was probably going to happen. 1 second before I get started, I want to make sure you can all see the proper version of this. A little bit of a issue with my screen here today. Okay. Sorry for the delay. I do this all the time. If you probably can't tell, but I definitely do this all the time. All right, let me share. What I'm going to do is actually start the slideshow and then share my screen. Let's see if that works. Okay, share screen. Okay, I think we've got it now. Here we go. Hopefully you can now see a slideshow. Okay, fantastic. Well, thank you, everyone. It's so good to be here. And I am excited to be here today. I want to thank the conveners of this for inviting me. I'm actually going to put a few things in the chat. These are links to resources that I am going to be talking about today. This is definitely a brief overview. We can get more into it if you want to email me. I'm going to have my email at the end of this. If you have more questions, and hopefully if you have some questions, I'm going to ask my friends at SUNY or the Department of the Navy or whoever is in charge to like help me with any questions that come up, because sometimes I can't always see what's happening with the shared screen. So as Joseph said, I am the director, prevention director at the National Sexual Violence Resource Center. I am, have been doing this work for almost 25 years now. I know I look so young, but it's been quite a while. For 7 years, at the very beginning of my career in the sexual violence prevention field, I did work at the local and community levels. I did education, I did advocacy, legal advocacy, medical advocacy, I did counseling. I did a little bit of everything. And so for 16 years, I've been at the national level and been able to do this fantastic work and training. But I have to say that 7 years of working at the local level has really given me that foundation, working directly with victims and survivors, working in the systems has really given me a good, I think, background and foundation for doing this work. So a little bit about the National Sexual Violence Resource Center. So we are the place to go nationally, pretty much what our name entails. We are the place to go nationally for information and resources on responding to and preventing sexual violence. So our core funding comes from the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. We have a website. We house the largest library of materials in the world on the topic of sexual violence. We just hit our 50,000 mark in our existence. So we have the largest library in the world. We provide both in-person and online trainings. We also have an online campus for online trainings and webinars. And one of the trainings I'm going to talk about today is our primary prevention primer, which you can find on our campus. We have a commitment to being an actively anti-racist organization. And really what this means is that, we know that working to end sexual violence won't happen until we work to end all forms of oppression. And so we also want to look to where there are gaps in resources. We work to fill those gaps by writing resources or bringing in people to help write resources for us. We have blogs, we have podcasts, we're on all the social media platforms. We also coordinate the National Sexual Assault Awareness Month campaign each year. So that's a little bit about us, and you can find us on the web. And so, one of the things I want to talk about a little bit when we think about sexual violence prevention, I've been doing this work for a long time, as I mentioned, and, typically in the past, our prevention messages were really focused on risk reduction, awareness raising, things like we promoted a lot of messages like stick with your buddy and don't walk alone at night, or self-defense is your best friend and watch your drinks. And it's not that those messages are necessarily bad. It's important to talk about the scope of the problem. But if we put all of our focus here and not on preventing perpetration, we're really missing a huge piece of the puzzle. So primary prevention work really requires us to confront the root causes of sexual violence. So root causes, thinking about those cultural norms that exist and allow sexual violence to happen in the first place. So it really helps us shift our focus to a more comprehensive approach to prevention. So some of you may be familiar with this story about moving upstream. It's kind of a popular public health story where someone is fishing and they notice that people are floating down the river, and they pull each one out one by one, but they notice that more and more people are coming and down the river, floating down the river. And the person suddenly realizes that I need to find out why people are coming in the river. I need to go upstream to find out, how are they getting in the river? Did a bridge collapse? Did someone intentionally push these people into the river? Why are people in the river? And so primary prevention is moving upstream to the root of the problem to prevent it from happening in the first place. So what does it take to prevent sexual violence? So It actually, I like to use an apple, this apple and pieces of an apple as an illustration. You'll see there are several pieces to this apple. So we have that raising awareness and risk reduction. That's a piece of it. We have intervention and services and treatment. And this is for both victims and people who perpetrate violence. We also have this piece of the puzzle or the apple that's the effective system response. So thinking about coordinated community teams that work together across fields, law enforcement, medical, advocacy, working to provide an effective system response to victims. And then we also have this piece that I'm going to focus on today, which is promoting healthy norms and behaviors. All of these pieces need to work together to effectively address and prevent sexual violence. The promoting healthy norms and behaviors piece that we're going to talk about today, that's primary prevention. So I am going to be showing you today some portions of an online learning tool that we developed here at NSBRC. So this tool is free to anyone. You just have to set up a free account on our online campus. This is something you can use for yourself, pass on to community members or coworkers. I have a coworker who used it with her parents because her parents said, "We don't understand what you do. For years, you've been working to prevent sexual violence, but we don't actually know what that means." And so she showed them this primer and they said, "Oh, okay, we get it now." So I think we think it's a nice overview of the primary prevention of sexual violence. So from the top tabs, you'll see that this goes over the moving upstream story we just talked about in that first tab. The second tab is about the social ecological model. This is where we're going to spend a little bit of time today. And then the third tab, we're also going to touch on briefly, that's the difference between risk reduction and primary prevention. And then there's also a fun quiz, which we're not going to do a quiz today, but when you do this on your own, you can definitely take the quiz and see how you do. So in the sexual violence field, we use the term primary prevention, which means stopping sexual violence before it even has a chance to happen. This is a basic definition. It really aligns with the public health model, and it has helped shape prevention efforts in the sexual violence prevention movement for more than a decade now. So during our brief time together today, we're going to explore this a little bit more in detail. In thinking about preventing sexual violence, primary prevention programming provides us the opportunity to focus on root causes of sexual violence. These are, again, the social norms, which are things like widespread attitudes, beliefs, things like that, that allow sexual violence to exist in the first place. This means that we need to make a connection between all forms of oppression. This includes things like racism, sexism, homophobia, ableism, adultism, ageism, classism. There's many isms that we that we deal with in our society every day. And when we think about all forms of oppression and root causes, like this is where we need to be focusing our work when it comes to primary prevention. These things create a culture in which inequality thrives and violence is seen as normal. So what prevention does is it really aims to change these systems and norms so that the new norms are equality, safety, and respect. So the social ecological model, it's a real helpful framing tool. We use it a lot talking about primary prevention. It's commonly used in the field of public health as a way to look at really a comprehensive prevention approach for many different health issues. But today we're going to focus on sexual violence prevention. So as you can see here, we think the model looks like nested eggs. Some people call them spheres, but each egg or sphere represents an area in which we can create change. So the smallest one represents individuals. So we're thinking in this area, we're thinking people's attitudes, their beliefs, their values on the individual level. The next level is the relationship level. And this is where people are interacting with their peers, their friends, partners, family members. This is that area. In the community area is where we're in the community sphere. These are things like schools or your neighborhoods. It could be a faith community. It could be a local organization. It could be a campus. It could be a base. It could be anywhere where people are coming together or housed together or meeting together regularly with some common things in common or common goals. And then this outer level represents society, which is like our laws and our systems and the widespread media and social norms. So these are all different spheres in which we interact with each other and where we can influence each other. So one thing to think about with prevention that we always want to make sure people know is that effective prevention efforts focus on multiple levels of the social ecology. One thing we know is that people don't live on islands all alone. Well, most people don't live on islands all alone, unaffected by the outside world. We can do everything in our power to be changing people's individual behaviors or beliefs or attitudes. But if everything else around that person, so if their friends, their family, their school, their community, the greater society, if those don't change as well, are we really able to create lasting change? So risk reduction is really a common way that many people think about preventing sexual violence. It's very common for a general public to confuse prevention and risk reduction. If you've been raised as, like I was as a young woman in our society, odds are that you've heard a lot of risk reduction messages in your lifetime. And, they tend to focus on increasing personal safety in order to avoid sexual assault. So if you've ever gotten advice to only walk on well-lit streets when you're alone, maybe you've gotten emails forwarded to you about the latest portable pepper spray keychain, or anything like that, you're probably familiar with risk reduction. And while these tips may help someone feel like they're taking action to avoid being sexually assaulted, and they're not bad messages, it's just messages that focus only on what potential victims could or should do is not prevention. So remember that our goal with prevention is to stop sexual violence before it even has a chance to happen. So this means we need to impact potential perpetrators and the social norms that allow sexual violence to exist. One way that we like to differentiate primary prevention from risk reduction is to ask ourselves, this question: who is responsible? So if the responsibility to do something, change something, or avoid something is on the person who could be victimized, that's considered risk reduction. If the responsibility is on the potential aggressors or the social norms that normalize violence, that then aligns with primary prevention. And there's a couple, I love this thing about our online tool, is that it gives like a little quiz. So we're not going to have you all weigh in, but just to give you an example, and you can do this kind of as you're sitting there in your head. One of the examples is, okay, so if someone's practicing ways to ask for consent in various situations with friends and partners, is that risk reduction or primary prevention? If you think about that, so thinking about, okay, we're teaching people and having them practice ways to ask for consent, talk about consent, that's actually primary prevention. And we let people know, here's why: because it builds skills to help people treat others with respect, also to respect boundaries. Another example we give is posting flyers telling young people to get their own drinks when they go to a party and not to let the drinks out of their sight. Is that risk reduction or primary prevention? This would be risk reduction because the responsibility to do something is on the person or the people who could be victimized. However, the nice thing about this tool that we have is that, do you want to make a primary prevention? Well, here's some examples of that. So think about ways you could work with young people to help them create parties where everyone feels respected and safe. Think about ways they could promote those messages to their peers. And there's always like really great examples. We have a lot of examples throughout the tool, but these are a couple of situations that I thought might be relevant to some of the work you all are doing, where risk reduction and primary prevention might get a little bit mixed up. So one of the other really important things to think about with this social ecological model is there's a shift happening right now. And I want to talk about it because I think it's really important. There's a shift happening with prevention programming. So a lot of programs are moving to these two outer spheres, or the two outer eggs of our social ecological model. And there's a reason why. So one reason is because that's where a lot of funding is shifting to funding programs that are doing more things at the community and society levels. But it also makes sense to begin pushing to these outer levels. As I said before, we've spent a lot of years working very hard to change individual beliefs and behaviors around sexual assault, which is great. And there's some awesome foundational work that's been done. Our programs have provided this really great information so that people can understand what sexual assault is, ways that they can change their individual behaviors, influence the ideas and behaviors of friends and family and peers to prevent it. Again, all good foundational work. But if we ignore the environment, thinking about the environment as like the community and society that people live in, and we don't work to change things at that broader macro level, then individuals have an uphill battle as they try to exist in this environment that doesn't support that change. So this is why work to change the characteristics and norms at those outer levels in the community, things like policy level change at both community and society levels, all of that is very important, and where we're seeing some shifts right now with prevention. So this is another helpful way to look at the focus areas. So if you think of individual as attitudes, beliefs, behaviors, relationship is where the building the skills, thinking about how we interact with other people. At the community level, you're thinking of local level policies or organizational or campus-based procedures or policies, codes of conduct, the physical built environment or structures in a community. And then society are things like those broader laws, like federal laws and policies. Again, the widespread media, cultural norms. The outer levels are not exactly easy spheres in which to create change. It takes a lot of work. But one thing that's different about community and society level change is that it impacts everyone in the community, regardless of whether they're a part of your prevention programming that you're putting out there or not. That's the nice thing about it. When we think about those macro level changes, it's going to start the work that we've been doing so much of for decades now is really starting to impact these broader macro levels now. And so that's the nice thing about the shift. And it's not saying we give up what we've done at the individual and relationship levels, that those things still need to happen, but that we're adding these other pieces onto it now. And if you'll humor me, this is another way I personally like to think about all of this social ecological model lingo is if we imagine individuals as frogs, in the communities as lily pads, and the society as a pond. So think about that for a second. I'm really into nature, so I love seeing frogs and ponds and flowers and lily pads. So if we're trying to better the environment for the frogs, our individuals, and the lily pads, their communities where they live and interact with other frogs and spend their time, we can't have them, if you can see what this picture is on the lower right, it's a dirty, yucky, swampy kind of looking pond. So if we want to better this environment, we can't have them floating in these dirty ponds, right? Without the supportive environment of a clean, life-sustaining, nurturing pond, both the lily pads and frogs will be unhealthy. So that's another way that I've been able to talk to people, especially people maybe not in our field or that need a little bit of a different example for helping to figure out why it's important for us to be doing primary prevention work and really thinking about these broader macro levels. It's important again, and I'm not going to spend a ton of time on risk and protective factors, but I want to pull them in as part of this overview with the public health focus, is that it's really important to look at risk and protective factors. At each of those levels of the social ecology, risk and protective factors exist so that we know what it is we're trying to prevent, and then also what we're trying to promote. So just like kind of the name entails here, risk factors are things that are associated with a greater likelihood of sexual violence perpetration. Risk factors are contributing factors. They might not be direct causes. One thing I always like to point out is that just because someone is identified as at risk does not mean they will become a perpetrator of sexual violence. So there's always a combination of individual relationship. Think about that social ecological model, community, societal factors that contribute to the risk of someone becoming a perpetrator of sexual violence. So it's really important for us to know, what are those risk factors? And then on the opposite end of that, what are the protective factors? What are those things that make it less likely that someone will be victimized or perpetrate sexual violence, either directly or something that creates some sort of a buffer against these risk factors? So when thinking about risk and protective factors and the root causes, we've talked a little bit about some of those things. It's also really important to talk about how the conditions in places where people work, where they play, where they live, where they learn, how those conditions affect a wide range of health risks and outcomes. These are known as social determinants of health. There's a lot of research on this, things that tell us that, research that tells us that poverty limits access to healthy foods and safe neighborhoods. Typically, if someone has more education, that's a predictor that they'll have better health. There's also a lot of research that points to the differences in health that are just so striking in communities with poor social determinants of health, like unstable housing, low income, substandard education, unsafe neighborhoods. And the reason this is so important is because, like I talked about at the beginning, like we can't talk about preventing sexual violence if we're not, and thinking about those spheres, those like, how do we influence the spheres without addressing the fact that there is a lot of inequality out there that we have to also be thinking about how we're going to address that as well. We want to improve individual and population health and also advance this notion of health equity. So this is the idea, we want to create social and physical environments that promote good health for all. And that's really what health equity is. It means that every single person has a fair and just opportunity to be as healthy as possible. But we have to think about, how do we remove barriers for people so that can happen? Those barriers, poverty and discrimination, racism, this powerlessness around like being able to access good jobs or safe environments or even healthcare. There's all of these things that make it inequitable for people. So a health equity approach, we really have to think about how we're going to address deep-rooted abuses of power that contribute to someone's lack of well-being. Or a health equity approach a health equity approach to preventing sexual violence really means that we need to both understand and address the factors that contribute to violence and safety, and the factors that expose some communities, and especially communities who have been historically oppressed, to higher rates of sexual violence. So that's kind of where that comes into play when we're talking about sexual violence. We have this really great new resource. I did put it in the chat. I will post it again at the end. I can't pull up the chat right now because I have too much on my screen, but hopefully you were here at the beginning and you saw my post. This is a brand new resource we just put out last month. It's a resource that we created with our partners at Prevention Institute. It's an overview about health equity work and how it relates to sexual violence prevention. And also, the one thing that's nice about this guide is it spotlights programs that are addressing health equity in their sexual violence prevention work. So it's really specific. So you can kind of see, what is this? How does it relate? But also, what does it look like in the real world for programs to be being mindful of a health equity approach and what that means. Another resource we created, this is really hard to see. That's also a link that I provided in the chat. Another resource we created is an infographic that highlights the connections. When I was talking about the risk and protective factors, it highlights the connections between the risk and protective factors and the social determinants of health. at various levels of the social ecology. So you'll see down the left side, it's the relationship, individual, community, society. We have across the top the risk factors, the protective factors, social determinants of health. And this is something that we promote that can be used to link sexual violence prevention with those things we talked about earlier, the anti-oppression work, related public health issues, where can we be creating more effective change, and where can we be working across all these different spheres and thinking about these bigger societal level and community level issues. So I'm just checking the time. Okay, it looks like we've got time. I wanted to sort of end the time with you today. I feel like I've thrown a ton of information at you. I hope it wasn't too much. I hope it was an okay overview. I wanted, though, to leave you all with this example so you can see what it looks like when a program implements activities across a social ecological model. So like many campuses, so this is a campus bystander example, and this actually comes from a campus that we've worked with. So like many campuses, this one has a great bystander program. I love bystander programs for campuses, for the military. I know has done some great work with bystander programs. Because you have a captive audience in a way, sort of. There's a lot of work you can be doing on a campus with a bystander program. And so, like many campuses, this one had a good bystander program that they deliver to a group of peer educators. It's very common. These individuals are trained to take action to promote healthy social norms with their peers and on campus. And they're like ambassadors for the norms and behaviors that we want to see in the community, in the campus community. So this level is really getting to those individual relationship levels of the social ecology. The college also wants to promote those positive norms across the campus. So one thing that they do is they create a social norming campaign. So they develop posters. Posters are hung around campus. They do radio spots. They do some podcasts. This is all focused on moving to those outer levels of the social ecology. In addition, they want to know more from students. What are the physical changes they can make to the environment on campus? So they do what's called hotspot mapping. Some of you may have heard that. It's where students are given an opportunity, whether it's online or through focus groups, they get to participate in identifying areas of the campus that feel, and these are physical environments, things that feel safe, places that feel safe and unsafe. And then the college works to address those places that feel unsafe by doing some very basic physical things to change that environment, like increased lighting, adding extra security at different times of the day. And then they also want to look at their current policies. So the administrators are looking at where changes need to be made or where new policies could be developed so that they're reflective of the new norms and the commitment to safety, equality, and respect. So really, it's this kind of well-rounded, if we think about that one slide, you can see where each initiative that this campus is doing is fitting into these various categories to implement change across the social ecology. So this is what we would call an example of a really comprehensive prevention programming. And one of the things I want to leave you with is, I always say this, it's a process. So it's easy to get overwhelmed when you're thinking about how do we change a community in a meaningful and an effective way? How do we do meaningful and effective prevention strategies? It can be a really daunting process. I think a great first step that I always like to tell people is simply, if you can simply say in your community, in your organization, wherever you're working, that prevention is a priority. And start mapping out a plan. We always tell people set some basic attainable goals, do a timeline, celebrate your victories and milestones, even if they seem small. We always want to make sure that people know it is a process, but it can make a big difference. And some of you may be doing some really great work at those inner levels of the social ecology, which is where we expect a lot of people to be doing that work. I would encourage you to think about, read some of the resources that I provided. I'm happy to provide more, but I would encourage you to think about how you can expand the work that you're doing, or think about how you can be doing more at the community level as well, and those outer levels of the social ecological model. So this is my information. I'm going to stop sharing so that I can see if there's any questions.
And we thank you, Jennifer, and we invite you to share any questions you have for Jennifer Grove in the chat. You are welcome to share them with everyone or send them directly to me, Joseph Storch, and I will anonymize them and share them with Jennifer. We've reshared the links a few times, and we will be sharing the code word shortly for those of you who are seeking credit. We will share that at the end of the session. Jennifer, this was a great introductory session. I like to say that prevention is an olive tree, and I wonder if you could comment on this. In ancient societies, anthropologists and archaeologists can tell where there was peace and folks were able to invest in the land because they planted olive trees, because they take years and years to bear fruit, unlike other trees which bear fruit much quicker. It's not about just for one semester or one program at a forward operating location, having a prevention program and saying, look at us, success story. Jennifer, could you talk about the sustained approach to prevention?
Yeah, thanks, Joseph. That's kind of what that campus example I gave you. So that was a campus that had been a lot of just every year they would have a new group and do their checklist of what for Title IX, here's what we have to do. And what I think this sustained approach using that example, they came to us and said, we want to do more. As a campus, we want students to feel like whatever we're putting out there, those posters mean nothing if there's not like a campus-wide from the top all the way to the bottom. And they had actually done training for their the cafeteria staff, the security staff, the maintenance staff. They really wanted to get this what we call saturation of the message, right? That we do a lot of sprinkling, and I've done that in my early work as well, where we go here and then we go there and we go here and we have one program and we do a thing, but there's not this saturated, sustained approach. And so I completely agree. I think that's the way to do it if you can. I know some communities people are working with are a bit more transient and they're not, you don't have access to the same people. But for this campus program, I think the nice thing about it is this sustained, saturated approach to how they're doing it means that whoever is coming into that campus is going to benefit from all the work, like those olive trees, all the work that's been done, all the time that's been put in to changing and creating an environment that's safe and nurturing and healthy. Everyone coming after, all these people that are doing the work are going to benefit from that if they continue to keep sustaining that programming. So I don't know if that helps at all, but I really like the olive tree example. Thank you, Joseph. I'm going to be thinking about that and adding that to my training. So
feel free to use it for sure. Before I ask the next question, one colleague wrote to me if I could ask one of my colleagues to reshare the links into the chat just for folks who arrived late. And Jennifer, maybe you could comment on this. A person wrote about hotspot mapping would benefit by including folks who facilitate a negative environment, not just the physical elements of a campus or base or forward operating location.
I'm sorry, I didn't understand that question.
I think, just maybe talking a bit more about hotspot mapping and how to think about it.
Sure, yeah. So hotspot mapping became really popular with a program called Shifting Boundaries, and that was really focused on campuses and now high schools. But it sounds to me at first when I heard about it, I was like, that's very risk reduction. That's we don't want to go backwards. But if you think about the environment of a campus or a base or whatever, wherever you are, any kind of community, again, in order to support the changes you're trying to make at the individual and relationship levels, you need to have that healthy environment. So hotspot mapping, so I'll give you an example. So a school in a program in North Carolina was working with this school, and they did this, and they were able to have the students, they gave them a map of the campus, and the students each filled out, here's red, and here's why it's red. This is a danger zone, and here's all the reasons why. This is a yellow, this is where it's a little bit dicey, and then here's all the green areas where we feel completely safe. They took all of those, they looked at, they did the research, they kind of looked at where there were some common issues were around safety, and they realized that there was just a lot of spaces, a lot of physical spaces in that environment that were just not safe for people. People didn't feel supported or, felt just very, very like they could be harmed in those areas or bullied or whatever it might be. And so they ended up really focusing their time and efforts on making those spaces more inviting, safer, whether that be, again, it's some of the physical things that we might not think about, like lighting and posting a safety officer there or whatever it might be. So that's just one example of how people are using hotspot mapping, but you can use it in pretty much any environment. They've done it in girls and boys clubs, in communities, things like that.
Jennifer, our next question, how do you overcome the idea of oversaturation and people not caring, because it's all they hear?
That is a great question. I always feel like we don't have enough saturation, but I think you're right. I do agree that in some places there may be oversaturation. I would say, keeping whatever program you're doing, it's hard when you have the same people in the same programming like all the time, and they're going to get this oversaturation. So it's almost like you have to have some different levels. It's sort of like we, this presentation I'm doing today, tomorrow I probably am going to be doing something, or next week I'll be doing a presentation for people who are like, I'm done with all this primary prevention stuff. I've heard it too much. I'm oversaturated with that. I know this. Now I've got to know how I take it and put it into practice, right? So those are some of the people or communities or whoever those people might be where that oversaturation is happening, somehow figuring out how to do a second level of the programming or get them involved in helping to do the programming too. That's another way to help with that feeling of oversaturation. I think that would be my recommendation, but.
Yeah, and I agree with you. And I think that the only thing I would add is try to meet folks where they are. And so if your programming is if they feel oversaturated, but they're off doing this other thing because that they find interesting. So they're sitting on TikTok all day, but they don't want to come to your live 2-hour programming. Well, get yourself on TikTok or adopt a TikTok style for a prevention program. Sort of go where they are, or eat where the truck drivers eat. Do prevention where folks want to be.
Agreed. Thank you for saying that. We always say meet your communities where they're at. They know best what they need. They know the format they need it in. That's one thing we do with, like, especially with young people. I used to go in and be like, here's a curriculum. You guys are going to love it. And they would just be like, this is dumb. This is stupid. We don't want, because I wasn't part of that community. I was just coming in with my stuff. Always make sure it's a good fit, right? So yeah, go follow their lead. I would say if you need to do something on TikTok, get used to TikTok. Just like we've gotten used to all the other social media platforms, we're now trying to figure out how do we do TikTok?
Well, Jennifer Grove, we thank you so much to you and the National Center, and just how privileged we are to have this introduction. We are going to take a 15-minute break before we hear from Dr. Sharon Potter.